What a narcissist really thinks when you stop chasing them. And I want to start with the word really because it is the most important word in this title, and the one that separates what this episode is offering from the version of this conversation that is more satisfying than honest, because the satisfying version is widely available. It tells you that when you stop chasing a narcissist, they are devastated, that they immediately recognize what they are losing, that the absence of your pursuit produces a clear-eyed reckoning with what your attention was worth and what your departure represents. And elements of that version are accurate enough that dismissing it entirely would be dishonest. But the really in this title is pointing at something more complete and more nuanced than the satisfying version offers. The really is the full picture, including the parts that are less dramatically vindicating, including the parts that require honest engagement with how the narcissist's psychology actually processes the cessation of pursuit, rather than how we might wish it processed it. And the full picture, received honestly, is ultimately more useful than the satisfying version, not because it is harsher or more cynical, but because it is accurate. And accurate information about what is actually happening is the only information that genuinely serves the person who stopped chasing and is trying to understand what their stopping produced. Let's establish what the chasing was doing for the narcissist's system, because the narcissist's thoughts, when the chasing stops, are organized around what the chasing was providing and what its cessation removes. The chasing, the pursuit, the reaching, the continuous orientation of your energy and attention towards someone who was withdrawing it, was providing something to the narcissist's supply economics that is worth naming precisely. It was providing the specific regulatory resource of confirmed significance, not the admiration of someone who is responding to the narcissist's presented self at its most impressive. The specific, more intimate, and more personally directed confirmation that comes from someone who continues to pursue despite not receiving proportionate return. The chasing, in other words, was providing something that ordinary supply does not provide. The confirmation not just that the narcissist is impressive enough to attract, but that the narcissist is significant enough to pursue even after the return on the pursuit has been demonstrably insufficient. That confirmation is more specifically regulatory than ordinary admiration because it addresses the actual anxiety underneath the construction. The anxiety not of being insufficiently impressive, but of being fundamentally not worth the sustained investment of a genuine person's genuine attention. Your chasing was addressing that anxiety directly. Every day you continued to pursue despite the inadequate return. You were providing the specific regulatory resource of someone having decided that pursuing despite inadequate return was worthwhile, that the narcissist was worth chasing even when chasing them cost you more than receiving them provided. And that specific confirmation of being worth the pursuit even when the pursuit was not being honored was more powerfully regulatory than almost anything the ordinary supply landscape produces. Now let's talk about what the narcissist actually thinks when the chasing stops. And let's be specific about the sequence, because the sequence is what most accounts of this miss. The first thing the narcissist thinks when the chasing stops is not what most people expect. It is not immediate panic. It is not the instant recognition of what is being lost. It is something considerably more mundane and considerably more revealing of how the supply mechanism actually operates. The first thing is the explanation. The narcissist system, encountering the cessation of pursuit, immediately produces an explanation that is compatible with the existing operational map and that does not require the map to be substantially revised. The explanation is almost always some version of the same thing. The pursuit stopped because of something temporary, something circumstantial, something that will resolve and restore the pursuit to its previous level, without requiring any fundamental change in the dynamic that produced the cessation. The pursuit stopped because the person is busy, because they are upset about something specific that will pass, because they have been temporarily influenced by someone or something that is creating distance that would not otherwise be there. The explanation is not consciously constructed. It arrives automatically, from the same mechanism that has always protected the construction from the implications of uncomfortable information, by routing that information through a frame that is less threatening to the construction's narrative. And in the early period of the cessation, the first hours, the first day or two, the explanation is sufficient. The system is not alarmed. It is waiting confidently because the map says this person pursues, and waiting for what the map predicts will happen is not the same as experiencing a threat. The second thing the narcissist thinks, arriving when the waiting produced by the explanation has not been vindicated by the pursuit resuming on the expected schedule, is something that the first explanation begins to struggle to contain. It is the question, not a fully formed, consciously articulated question. The beginning of a question, the specific, low-level background processing quality of a system that is beginning to register that the expected input is not arriving on schedule and is beginning to generate the first tentative inquiry into why. The question is not about you specifically yet. It is about the map, whether the map is accurate, whether the prediction the map generated, that the cessation was temporary and the pursuit would resume, is being confirmed by the incoming data, and the incoming data is not confirming it. The pursuit has not resumed. The reaching has not restarted. The orientation toward the narcissist that the map said was the person's primary relational orientation is not demonstrating itself in the ways the map predicted. And the system, which runs on the map's accuracy, is beginning to register the discrepancy between the map's prediction and the territory's behavior. The question is the first expression of that registration. And the question, however tentative and however quickly the explanation reasserts to contain it, is the first genuine crack in the confidence with which the map was being held. The crack is small. The explanation is still managing it, but it is there. And what happens to the crack as the cessation continues, and the specific thoughts the narcissist produces as the explanation becomes increasingly insufficient to contain what the territory is demonstrating, and the moment the question becomes unavoidable and what it produces when it does, that is exactly where we are going next. What happens to the crack as the cessation continues is the most psychologically revealing sequence available in the entire arc of this dynamic, and understanding it clearly is what allows the person who stopped chasing to receive what the sequence produces in the narcissist's behavior as the information it actually is, rather than as something that requires a response. The explanation that was containing the crack begins to require more resources to maintain as the days accumulate without the pursuit resuming. This increased resource requirement is itself information. The system is working harder than it should need to work if the explanation were genuinely adequate to the situation. And the increased effort shows in specific behavioral ways that the people closest to the narcissist's daily functioning may observe. A quality of distraction, a slightly reduced presence in interactions that would ordinarily receive the narcissist's full, managed attention. The specific, low-level restlessness of a system that is running a background process that is consuming more resources than background processes are supposed to consume. The question that the explanation was containing begins to expand. It moves from a question about the map's accuracy to a question about you specifically. Why has this person stopped? Not in the theoretical map consulting way of the early period. In the specific, personally directed way of someone who is beginning to register that the cessation is about something real rather than something circumstantial. And this is where the narcissist thinking about you when you stop chasing becomes most honest and most revealing. Because the personally directed version of the question requires the narcissist system to do something the explanation was specifically organized to prevent. It requires consulting the actual history of the dynamic rather than the map's edited version of it. The actual history, when it is consulted even partially and even in the defended, incompletely conscious way that the narcissist system consults anything that implicates the construction's behavior. The actual history contains information that the map's edited version does not contain. It contains the specific, accumulated record of what the chasing was responding to, what produced it, what the dynamic was asking of the person who was doing it, and what the dynamic was returning. And that record, even partially accessed, even through the construction's management of what is allowed to be consciously registered, produces something in the narcissist thinking about you that is more specifically honest than the map consulting question was. It produces the beginning of the recognition that the cessation is not circumstantial, that it is the natural result of something the dynamic was producing over time, that it is, in some form, the construction resists fully articulating, deserved. This beginning of recognition is not guilt in the full sense. It is not the conscious, morally organized acknowledgement of responsibility that genuine accountability would require. It is more primitive than that, more specifically located in the actual self's territory, the place below the construction where the honest accounting of what happened lives in the fragments and the unprocessed awareness that the management mechanisms have been containing. The beginning of recognition surfaces from that territory into the narcissist's thinking about you with the specific quality of something the construction did not invite and would prefer to root back below the surface. And the routing effort, the specific energy the construction deploys to convert the beginning of recognition back into the explanation's more comfortable framing, is what produces the most visible behavioral expression of this stage. The sudden increase in supply-seeking activity, the conspicuous forward motion, the specific, slightly too urgent quality of someone who is generating noise and momentum to cover a quietness they do not want to sit inside. What the narcissist really thinks when you stop chasing them, in the most complete and most honest account available, is a sequence rather than a single thought. First, the explanation, which is confident and comfortable and compatible with the existing map. Then the question, which is tentative and background and beginning to crack the explanation's containment. Then the personally directed version of the question, which requires partial consultation of the actual history rather than the map. Then the beginning of recognition, which arrives from the actual self's territory with the honest accounting the construction was organized to prevent. And then the construction's response to the beginning of recognition, the increased supply seeking, the conspicuous forward motion, the specific behavioral expressions of a system that is working harder than it should need to work to maintain the explanation's containment of something that the cessation of your pursuit has made considerably harder to contain. What this sequence means for you, the person who stopped chasing, who is perhaps observing some of these behavioral expressions from whatever distance the stopping created, is something worth receiving clearly. The sequence is not a reason to resume the pursuit. It is not evidence that the recognition it contains will develop into the genuine reckoning that genuine change requires. It is not grounds for softening the stopping or receiving the increased supply-seeking activity as something that deserves a different response than the stopping produced. The sequence is information. Specifically, it is confirmation that the stopping was accurate, that what the cessation removed was something the dynamic was extracting from you at a cost that the dynamic was not honoring, and that the extraction cessation is producing in the narcissist system exactly the kind of resource stress that the extraction scale would predict when the source is no longer available. You are providing something real. The sequence confirms it. The sequence does not make continuing to provide it the right choice. It makes understanding the value of what you were providing and the cost at which it was being provided the most important information the stopping has made available. And that information, received clearly and without the distortion of hope or the performance of vindication, is what the stopping was always supposed to produce. Not the narcissist's reckoning, your clarity about what you were giving, what it was worth, and what your attention, freed from the pursuit that was consuming it, is now available to build instead. That clarity is worth more than the narcissist's recognition ever would have been, because the clarity is yours, and the life you build with it, organized around what your attention actually deserves to be directed toward, is the most complete answer to the question of what your stopping was for. It was not for the narcissist's thoughts about it. It was always for this.